link. Our first speaker this evening is Professor Chucks, as I'll call him, and he will give us the correct pronunciation of his name. He is a visiting professor here from the Faculty of Medical Sciences. I'm seeing you sideways. I don't know about the others. He's here from the School of Medical Sciences, Faculty of Medical Sciences in Mona. And we are really pleased that he has taken some time at very short notice of about a week to agree to present here today. He is only with us until August, and so everybody is going to make the most of his expertise. He has several outstanding publications and an outstanding publication record. He ranks in the top 20 worldwide in terms of heavy metals research. He served as an international consultant to the United Nations Development Program on debris and waste management, and we will share the detailed bio with you in the chat box. He holds 2 PhDs, one in environmental health biology from the Federal University of Technology, Owerri, and the other in medical psychology from the University of Benin, Nigeria. He's a member of the Regional Advisory Group for the Americas of International Society on Hypertension and country coordinator for the May month measurement annual blood pressure throughout Jamaica. And so, Professor Chucks, first of all, please share the correct pronunciation of your name, and then welcome to be the first presenter in this series. And please note that we are seeing you sideways. I don't know if you can change the layout of your presentation.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chukwuemeka Nwokocha, and I'm here at the University of Belize till the end of August. I'm a professor of environmental health and medical physiology at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. And I'll be sharing with you a snippet of my study, which is on hypertension. And here we're going to be kind of telling a story of some part of the work we have done over at Mona. And of course, also this work, some of it has also been done in other parts of the world. This will be the discussion we're going to be having today. So our topic for presentation is the hypertension study from the laboratory to the community and back. And of course, whenever we talk about hypertension, it's, of course, trying to remind us that it's one of the very dangerous NCDs that we have. And the outcomes and the complications will range from people having stroke and dementia, people having kidney problems, which we actually see is very much on the rise, especially in this part of the world. We see there's a lot of chronic kidney diseases, which can be attributed to high blood pressure. We have issues of people going blind, and the other kind of portfolio that goes with high blood pressure with issues of myocardial infarction, coronary arterial disease, and all the possible damage that it may entail, ranging from even sexual dysfunction to tinnitus, as the case may be. We, of course, are very much aware that this is a problem for us in the world. Now, when we talk about this, we have always highlighted that some of the causes of hypertension, of course, we know we're able to group hypertension based on issues of essential hypertension and secondary hypertension, where we talk about what we know that can cause hypertension, but we know that more than 80% of what is causing hypertension are still not known. But here we can naturally group things based on genetic disposition. We know that there are people in different parts of the world who have elevated blood pressure or who have a reduced blood pressure, which can be identified as a genetic trait. But we know that there are other issues of obesity, smoking, having a very high salt content in food, alcohol consumption, stress, and aging are all implicated in the cause of hypertension. Now we can go further to talk about other things, that lifestyle issues. I of course mentioned smoking and stress. And I know, yes, from my interaction so far, since I have been on campus, it's something that almost everybody complains about. The workload is stressful. Life, and of course, itself is already stressful. And we find that the combination of these can make each and every one of us, or make many of us rather, predisposed and actually hypertensive patients. Let me use that word. So in all this discussion, we are hearing again, there are newer or identifiable traits that actually can be able to lead to hypertension. And here we're looking at pollution. We're looking at pollution in the sense that pollution affects the environment. Pollution, of course, will affect what we eat, what we drink, what we inhale. And when we have these polluted environments, these chemicals and everything that we encounter in the environment will cause things like a reduction in nitric oxide, which is a very important chemical that kind of controls the contractility of the blood vessel. So we see there will be the increase in vascular damage. We also see that vascular damage increasing with regards to the increase in oxidative stress and the release of so many other chemicals like cytokines that further cause more inflammation, more damage. And when this damage is peculiar, or when this damage is much more noticeable with regards to the vascular tissues or even the kidney, we will begin to note that these can be major predispositions or major issues that can actually cause these elevated blood pressure in people within the environment. Now, in Jamaica, we have a very, very peculiar story. When I arrived in Jamaica, one of the things we tried to look at was, of course, to find out if there is a profile of some of the heavy metals in Jamaica. And thankfully, Leolin et al. In 1998 has actually published a very important document about the heavy metal profile in Jamaica, where they mapped the different parts of the island to say the different concentrations of metals like lead, like cadmium, like arsenic, aluminium, and all the much. And one of the things we observed was that in that publication, some of the concentrations of a metal like cadmium actually was recorded as being one of the highest in the world, about 200 parts per million. This, of course, even this ranks almost, let me just say about the highest that's been recorded from the soil. And since since we as individuals interact and we eat what we grow, we have actually noticed that people who live in these environments, in these vicinities where there's a high record of these metals, of course, are bound to also be affected. And not just individuals. It happens that these areas that were implicated happen to be the food basket of the nation. So not just those who lived in those populations, but we found that people who live farm and wild. We also found that people who also eat the ground provisions like yam and all whatnot, those people are also, and we know that Jamaica, of course, exports some of these ground provisions like potato and yam. So we are seeing that there is a lot of interaction between the individuals and the environment. So we set out to see if there is a correlation or incidence based on the prevalence of hypertension as it has to do with this heavy metal accumulation in the Jamaican population. That was one of the objectives we had in some of our research. Here, I am going to focus on this part of research because this is like telling a story, how we are moving from observation in the environment to the laboratory, trying to make assessments based on animal models using rats to be able to make the human body try to find what are the pathways and what are the mechanisms that are possibly going to cause these kind of aberrations. And moving from there back again to the community to see how this assessment holds and back again to the laboratory. And I think we're trying to follow this scientific rigorous process in order to see and actually identify and document what could be wrong so that we can be able to effectively give kind of a documentation of data that may actually influence policy and, of course, bring about a healthy living in our population. Now, among the first studies we did in Jamaica was we tried to see in laboratory animals whether this cadmium at certain concentrations can be able to affect blood pressure. And yes, we found that one of the publications we had in cardiovascular toxicology is a very high. I'll be pointing out these publications and their impact factor is a very high impact factor. I'm using most of the publications from high impact factor journals. Here in cardiovascular toxicology, publication was trying to find out if cadmium can cause an elevated blood pressure. And yes, we found that we can use cadmium at doses of as much as even 100 parts per million, at doses as much as 20 or even 10 parts per million to be able to induce a high blood pressure. And we have since adapted that technique and that model in the many other animal studies that we have been doing. And one of the things we found out that this cadmium is not just only causing this elevated blood pressure, but it's doing that through a destruction of the endothelium, which are some of those cellular linings of blood vessels. In fact, the endothelium is actually called one of the biggest organs in the body because it lines these blood vessels and it releases very essential chemicals like what they call the nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is called endothelium-derived relaxation factor. And when this chemical is released, its role is to cause the vasodilatation of the blood vessel. And that dilatation will lead to a reduction in what we call the peripheral resistance, which factors in to cause a reduction in aspects of the total blood pressure. But we found that these elevations using molecular mechanics and techniques was able to cause a damage and a reduction of this nitric oxide synthesis. That was one of the things we found as one of the mechanisms. And of course, further studies, which we've done this first work was, of course, in we, of course, had another publication in hypertension research in 2021, where we have now kind of looked at more kind of renal mechanisms, because in our observation, we also found that the kidneys are the most likely places that these cadmium will be able to accumulate. We found out, of course, across other metals in our study, that the kidney or the cadmium especially has a higher affinity to accumulate in the kidney. And now about the kidney is regarded as the most important organ in the regulation of blood pressure, because the kidney controls release of hormones. Hormones, of course, we talk about hormones, the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, which plays a very important role. And we found that the majority of drugs that are used as antihypertensive are kind of targeting that pathway, the RAS pathway, in order to cause an amelioration. So we found, of course, that not only is the kidney being where they accumulate most, but they cause more of this damage to the kidney. And our findings where this cadmium does induce hypertension is associated with these changes in the renin-myosin light chain phosphatase. And of course, they're able to cause this change via increases in T6-7, T6-9-7 phosphorylation. We have actually gone molecular to find the pathways, and I will talk a little bit about the molecular pathways that we have been able to report about our findings. Affecting the P44 mitogen activated protein kinase levels. These are molecular pathways that are invariably interlinked with these vascular relaxations and vascular contractility. And when there is a change or shift in the mechanism of function, they can cause these long-lasting changes. Those were our findings when we look at the animal studies. Now, we also were running parallel studies. Of course, you would have heard from the introduction that I happen to be the coordinator of the May measurement moons for Jamaica. And we have started running the parallel studies since 2017. Every year we run this study and we have taken the whole Jamaica as a population of study. And here it is a kind of opportunistic sampling where we sample individuals, just take their blood pressure, take demographic data, and also as an avenue for us to impact the society through a hypertension campaign. So we go on campaign to these different places, in the churches, in the malls, in the markets, wherever we see people gathered, where they're willing, and we talk to them about the problems of the high blood pressure, about how they can manage them. We ask for their consent to have a recording, and this study is being carried currently in over 100 countries in the world. And one of the studies in 2019, of course, which has this one was about participating people, was about 1.5 million of people who are 18 years and above. One of the things we found that were like that there are many people who are hypertensive who do not know they're hypertensive. And because they don't know they're hypertensive, they are not on any antihypertensive medication. There are people who are hypertensive who have been diagnosed, who doctors have put on these hypertensive medications, but they're not taking them. And this, of course, all contribute to that surge and the scourge, where oftentimes you see people dropping dead and you ask, why are these happening? I can recall one of the events we had in one of the markets, one of the coronation markets in Jamaica, and I recorded this lady, her pressure was about 210, 130. And when my other volunteers kind of came across her, they have to bring her to me. And she was just walking around freely. I mean, like as if nothing happened. And that person can easily drop dead at any moment in time because these are kind of things that can lead to stroke or lead to even other debilitating diseases like we mentioned. Yes, diabetes can actually be kind of interrelated with hypertension because when there's a vascular damage, that vascular damage also leads to issues of diabetic neuropathy and diabetic vasoreactive issues. So we see a lot of linkages to this. So one of the things we set up was to document these data, to use that opportunity to talk to people and campaign in a way of kind of giving back to the community, not just thinking that we are in the ivory towers where we just do experiments, but having an opportunity to reach out to people, to talk to people one-on-one, and be able to tell them how they can have a healthy lifestyle, tell them about these issues. We found that many people who have never done their blood pressure, it's surprising, but that actually was the truth. And these were some of the findings, kind of global trend that we had. We have also since published the data from Jamaica. And in the data from Jamaica, we've seen very, very high trends. And it will surprise you. I remember asking my dean here since I came, I mean, what could be the possible level of incidence or prevalence of hypertension in Belize? And values I'm seeing online look so wonderful because even though our study has been a kind of an opportunistic sampling, we've been getting incidences and prevalence of about 40%. And what does that tell you? That tells you that almost 1 in every 2 persons you see on the street can be hypertensive. So apart from that glamour of we have all those elite athletes, we have all the beautiful models, we have all the people who look healthy. It is not really the case. People can actually look healthy, look handsome, look pretty, but they're not healthy. And of course, that goes back to that same insinuation we have in the medical practice of saying that everybody is apparently healthy. So here was a publication. We've had publications of this main measurement month analysis of the blood pressure in 2019, 2017, 2021. And yes, one of our biggest happiness was, of course, publishing this in the European Heart Journal. This is a journal of about impact factor of 22. I was so elated, of course, that I could put that work out there in an environment that people can access, people can actually use that information to be able to kind of, better the situation. Now, these are some of the trends that we saw. These are some of the trends we saw in Jamaica. This is data for 2019. Here in 2019, we sampled just 2,550 participants. We don't call them patients, they're participants. And the number with hypertension was 41% out of that number. I can tell you that's what we're talking about, that 1 in every 2% that we met could actually have a problem. And among these people who had hypertension, just about 70% of them were aware. So it means that 30% of these people who were hypertensive were not even aware that they were hypertensive. We saw that, of course, that in that same number, only 66%, sorry, 62% were on medication. Others were not taking any medication. People have different reasons why they don't take medication. And yes, as we delve into this research, we see other social issues popping up. Naturally, we'll find that males do not like to take medication, unlike females. So there are issues that have to do with issues of gender psychology, issues that have to do with cultural appropriations, which affect how people are able to relate with healthcare and medical practice. But it is, of course, an insight so that when we now decide to make policies, that those policies should be targeted in such a way that you are able to get the people who are not seen. That is actually one of the aims and one of the things we hope our data collection and our publications can actually serve for the wider community. So we note that there were a number of people who were not on medication. There are some of them who had their blood pressure controlled, but some didn't have the blood pressure control. These were kind of, insights we got. And it has dovetailed into different other campaign. I know there was another campaign I have been involved with because I say so. We are trying to encourage people that if you're on hypertension or if you're hypertensive, you can be on medication as a way of controlling that. Yes, people can give you different issues. Yeah, we know, of course, for some males, some of those antihypertensive drugs may affect their, their virility in quotes. And because everybody wants to show I'm a macho man, I'm strong, they don't want to take it. But we find out these people are not looking at the general picture. So it is that constant reminder, which we do through our campaign, as a means of reaching out to these people, as a means of talking to them, that they become aware that they have a role to play with regards to their health status. Now, the continuation of our work, of course, has been that we sought then to see, are there major linkages? Remember that the earlier publications I mentioned were on animal studies. So here we've been on the same kind of community campaign to see if there is a link between these heavy metals and hypertension status. And what we saw was quite revealing. We were able to, data collection, find and also categorize the degree of hypertension and non-hypertension across the different age group. So we can see in this chart, those who are non-hypertensive versus those who are hypertensive in the blue and the orange, that for different age group, we have a different presentation. So you see that those who are in age bracket of 18 to 30, 18 to 29, we have many of them who are non-hypertensive. But by the time we look at the age bracket of 30 to 39, more people are hypertensive at this stage. And we see that this trend, of course, we can look at the issues of stress, we can look at other issues. But here in this discovery, we find that there was some bit of correlation. A correlation was not that statistically significant, but one of the things I teach when I talk about environmental health and epidemiology is the fact that even if there is a 1% increase in the blood pressure, it of course means something great, because that 1% or 1 millimeter mercury change may just be for a certain population. So even if we have like 100% and we're having 10% not being hypertensive, that does not mean that we should, of course, disabuse that data. That data is also very important. It's important because it's possible that you may sample another group that has the same genetic trait with the people who make up your 10%, and that becomes something that, of course, is just not only reasonable, but is important to document. So we found there was a correlation of the accumulation of cadmium in blood with issue of elevated blood pressure. So the mean blood cadmium concentration was highest in the 50 and over age blood group, who has a BMI of about 30 kilogram per meter squared. And the person correlation revealed a positive but small strength of association for blood cadmium concentration and blood pressure measurements for the both systolic and diastolic. And these kind of gave some confirmation to what we have seen in our animal study, which are done and which will continue to do in different procedures. So analysis of our covariance odds ratio indicated that for every unit increase in the blood cadmium concentration, the odds of the respondent being hypertensive increased by a factor of about 1.035. And of course, if we adjust this, we see that is, of course, further elevated for both basal metabolic index and, of course, age. We, of course, had earlier identified in some of the work we have also done concurrently that even though we see these elevated concentrations of cadmium in the blood of some of our participants, we and also see there's an elevated high blood pressure in some of the participants. We do not have majority of the other pathological outcomes like what you would have seen in laboratory animals. And we're asking, how then was it possible that people may have so elevated cadmium in their blood? Or they may be exposed to a very high concentration of cadmium. Mind you, again, these studies, we've done some part of it in mercury and in lead and in arsenic. But the question that we're asking is that how then is it possible that we may have this elevated cadmium concentration in body because of people being exposed, people living in the environment, and we do not have the commensurate pathological burden? And these people walking out freely. And of course, when we go through the literature, we find out that even in tissues that have been collected in the course of autopsies, there is a high concentration of these metals. And we started surmising there's a possibility that these may be because of also the food that we eat. We note that there are going to be possible interactions between food content because of the very high concentration of nutraceuticals and high concentrations of antioxidants in them, which can challenge and kind of not just only challenging, but also kind of find a way of compartmentalizing these metals, these toxins. And we have had those publications where we looked at things like even tomato interacting with mercury, lead, and cadmium, garlic interacting with mercury, lead, and cadmium. And one of the things we found in these publications were that these food components has a very rich content of medicinal principles. And those medicinal principles are playing a very important role in either chelating them, which actually are the things we'll do medically by giving an injection that can chelate for somebody who had a poison or somebody who has ingested any of these metals. But not only chelating, there are possibilities that these food components are able to chelate, able to compartmentalize, able to render these metals non-effective in such a way that they are not that free in the blood to cause the damage that we expect them to do, especially when we kind of compare these outcomes with other chemical outcomes. So yes, the food we eat can actually play a very important role. We published this in Food and Chemical Toxicology, the British Journal of Health Impact Factor of 8.5. And this, of course, telling us that these components of food play a very important role. We had similar thing with Garcinia cola, bitter cola, of course, ameliorating these concentration. We had similar thing even with something like garlic and, ginger, zingiber official, that there are some of these things that we have in our environment that possibly are part of the food we take that can actually be of help to us. Now, when I first discussed these findings, I had some colleagues who kind of queried how that possible. There's this constant, fight between the use of natural products and the use of orthodox medication. But the irony is that these things are available. And guess what? I kind of felt a bit vindicated among those who I was arguing earlier when COVID came. Because when COVID came, all of us kind of practically ran away from the orthodox medication. We all kind of ran to the bush medicine. We all found that, this bush medicine was good, even though we have been criticizing them. Yes, agreed that we have a problem with issues of, understanding and, of course, looking at the dosage and, of course, compartmentalizing and understanding these principles. But they are effective. And that effectiveness of these principles were some of the things that we now set up to do in the other part of our work. We now decided that instead of just talking about these based on folkloric assumptions, some of us grew up hearing our grandparents or grandpa or grandma tell us that, oh, when I felt or when I had these ailments, I boiled this root, I boiled these leaves, and I took them and I felt relief. That one of our roles as physiologists was to go in depth to find what, to actually see if we can confirm or validate these same assumptions. That is number one. But also go to find out how do they work? What is the mechanism of action behind these principles? And yes, these are some of the kind of reputative models that we started developing. I know if you open a textbook of physiology or a textbook of medicine and you see all these kinds of arrows going from where to where, you may begin to ask, how are they coming about? They're coming about from even this type of little studies that we are doing. When we see that a particular agent is able to maybe interact with the nitric oxide pathway, maybe influence or decrease the reduction or production of the inositol nitric oxide, the ENOx, or even affects the calcium release, or even the potassium release, or influence the ion channels opening or closing, we can actually then be able to say that this is how it works. We can synthesize that again and move into the part of drug production. This, of course, how some of the drugs we use are working. And this is some of the things that we are hoping to be able to replicate, because today, thankfully, we're having a lot of nutraceuticals that are being accepted, being marketed, that it's important that we should also know how they work. So we went into looking at the mechanism of action. How does it really work? What is the roots? And not the roots, how are they able to influence the metabolic process? So we see that some of our findings, like here, a publication we had for soursop as Anona moricata, we found that we were able to use it to reduce blood pressure. How is it able to do that? It's able to do that again, influencing the nitric oxide release, which then acts like a balance that balances the other chemicals in the body, like the prostaglandin E, the thromboxane E, A2, which are very, very much involved in vascular activity. And since that is a finding, we can actually say that this is effective. We can actually use it. And it's all about understanding and modeling the right kind of dose that then helps us to be able to maybe commercialize this. Now we've done again not something that like we call it GINEP. GINEP is a very important food in Jamaica. We publish it in scientific reports, which is Nature. I mean, it's one of those things, of course. I remember, yes, publishing a paper in Nature on scientific reports. Yeah, it makes you feel good. You are not just doing something, but you're able to push it out in the wider world that people can consume, people can interact with it, people can maybe be able to use this and understand that there is a scientific validity to what they are using. That is not just bush medicine like we think about it, but that it actually has a big efficacy. And one of the things we found with this GINEP, the food pulp, was that it reduces blood pressure. And of course, it's able to reduce blood pressure through reduction in the peripheral resistance and the heart rate. It's able to influence the issues again of the endothelium, because here we can challenge animals and have different models of hypertension. Yes, this is one of the things I do in my lab. We can be able to have different models of hypertension. We can have a renal model. We can also have another model. There are antioxidant models of this hypertension. And we can challenge these models and see how they are able to interact and how they're able to cause their amelioration. And that way, we're able to say this is what has happened. So this was one of the things we did with GINEP. Here was another Seneconotans, it's a South American known product. We are able to find again the pathways that are involved, and then we're able to go further to say not just only discovering the pathways, but then to do a kind of breaking it down through using HPLCs to find out what exactly are these medicinal components. and then isolating these individual medicinal components to see if they can act on their own, or if they act in a synergistic manner, or if they can actually act maybe in different ways. And that way, if we are able to isolate them, whether we can make them a known drug. And we see again, GINEP, we found out we can use it to be able to reduce myocardial infarction because it has effect on changes. We do even using techniques like looking at the ECG, looking at the blood pressure changes in the animals, looking at histological issues like morphology and hypertrophy, that these can actually cause a reduction in myocardial infarction, which is one of the problems, or myocardial infarction is the damage to the heart muscle, which can lead to angina pectoris or heart attack, and of course, a leading cause of death in many individuals. We've broken down some of these chemicals, some of these herbal remedies into forms, into tiny form components, and we're able to see that they can also interact with the ion channels. Because a lot of diseases are actually because of ion channelopathies, because either some diseases, we said a lot of diseases like diabetes or hypertension are actually kind of happening because there is a damage to an ion channel. It is not something you see visually. But imagine if a chemical like calcium, which is essential in the vascular contractility, and you block that calcium at a particular phase of the contraction, you're going to have a deranged contraction. If a chemical like potassium is blocked, because here we can see there's a long or a very wide spectrum of the very different channels. And just the blockage or dysfunction of one channel versus the other channel are why we have disease outcomes. So we're able to use these chemicals or these chemicals we synthesize from these herbs to challenge and find that some of them are actually acting as voltage modulators. Some of them are acting as ion channel modulators. And because they're able to act that way, this is how they're able to bring about the antihypertensive property that people talk about. So our work was not just to say that this is an antihypertensive remedy, but it's to say, how is it exactly working? We've had publications, Journal of Ethnopharmacology, in Ateliers breadfruits, worked on the leaf, looked at these different presentation again, looking at the molecular mechanisms and what exactly do they do, how are they able to do them, looking at, well, basically, that's a story that I'm just trying to tell, that we can use these natural components and we can be able to find in them those medicinal principles. And if we fully and truly understand the processes through which they're acting, we can go in the process of drug formulation. We can go into issues of clinical phase trials, which can, of course, be models that we can now generate something natural. And why is it important? Because we know that the body accepts things that are natural a lot more than things that are synthetic. And this is one of the goals. So here we've seen that this aristotylene can, of course, influence the potassium channels. It can influence the calcium channels, and in such way bring about some even tiny contractions in the smooth muscles, which are important for how that blood vessel will behave, which are important for how the heart may behave. And those, of course, are the things we set up to do, because this has never been reported before. When we fully understand the importance of what we have, when we understand the roles they play, we can actually be thinking about issues that can go into economic development. And this is one of the things that we're thinking about in this part of our world. How are we able to leverage on the natural products we have in our communities to benefit our people? How are we able to understand these interactions? Because it's going to be cheaper, and that way medical practice becomes a little bit cost effective if we know what to do. Yes, we even looked at mango. The mango leaves to see that, yes, they have a role when we broke down the components, looking at the quercetin, which is part of the component, to see it has a role to play with issues of calcium channel modeling. Sorry. Hello? About it? What's happening?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
All right. Okay. And we've gone to even try to synthesize some of the chemicals from those leaves and some of those barks and roots. And we are seeing that some of them even have very potent for anti-tumor agents. I didn't want to go into that part of work. I just wanted to mention that because, yes, we have other publications which are looking at these tumor agents in a bid to also counteract the aspects of the non-communicable diseases like cancer. Remember, diabetic cancer, hypertension are all in that area. And this is how we're able to see the model. Looking at this graphical abstract, we can see how some of these interactions are going on. And from here, when you see, these are things I tell the medical students, when then you see the beautiful pictures, throwing arrows left, right, center, and telling you this connect with this connect with that, this inhibits this activates that, it begins from these little tiny kinds of research and realization. Yeah, this was published in Molecules. Molecules is one of the, of course, I'm particularly using the high impact journals. We've gone to look at how, yes, I mentioned, look at the issues of how chemicals will influence the dysregulation, because everything about pathology is that these cells have moved from the normal homeostatic mechanisms to a pathological state because of dysregulation. And this dysregulation is coming about because of the disruption in the homeostatic patterns. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. So here, that's tetributryl hydroquinone. We've been able to see that we can use it to preserve testicular sterogenesis. Again, seeing that, yes, we can be able to leverage that knowledge and those pathways, because what happens again in the heart or happens in another tissue may not be different from what happens in other tissues. It's all about relocating or understanding what receptors are where. There's some receptors you may find only in the heart, but you may find those same receptors from the heart, you may find them in the liver, and there's some receptors you may find only in the kidney, that only in the kidney. But when we are able to see these interactions, we're able to modulate these kind of understanding of the mechanism of action of our remedies. So, yes, part of our publications, we've been able to challenge. You see, I'm having many of these stressings. I mentioned the first topic I mentioned was apocynin. Apocynin, we were able to use that to be able to understand how cadmium was able to cause hypertension, because with apocynin, which was an NADH blocker, we're able to interact and see where in this subunit, where along these receptors or these many receptors on this cell surface are these interactions happening. We're able to do that. We have been able to link these studies, because oftentimes we talk about the oxidative stress as a major component driving this pathogenesis, and we have been able to link this stress to metabolic syndrome, because metabolic syndrome today will consist of things like hypertension, myocardial infarction, issues of obesity, yes, obesity majorly, and of course the increase in lipid content in the body. And these are possibly all due to inflammation, which has its good side and which also has its bad side. Still here, we're trying to see the interactions of the potassium channel, and those channels are very important, like I say, in diabetic vasculopathy. And here we, in this archives of physiology and biochemistry, we're able to see these interactions, understand these interactions in a way to create the necessary understanding of how we can then possibly ameliorate or possibly manage those conditions. Now, we've gone, of course, not just saying that we want to just understand how we use this chemical or what these chemicals do, but today we find, of course, that yes, ethically, yes, using laboratory animals, of course, people who frown on animal usage because you have to sacrifice them. But today, with the right tools in the environment, we are also adapting newer models or newer kind of tools, where today we have what we call molecular dockings. There are softwares that are designed to kind of model these receptors that we were initially looking for in these animal tissues. And of course, with using chemistry, we're able to modulate, understand the components of maybe some of these kind of medicinal components, and we can use them and challenge those receptors directly. So here we're using aspects of molecular modeling or molecular docking, I would say, to see how we can just play like AI. This is like AI. We're trying to move into the world of AI, how we can kind of design that molecule and see how that molecule can fit into the receptor, which of course are all based on AI capabilities. And that again is further, we are using this, working together with our animal studies to still see that that of course is a possibility. And yes, one of the work we published recently, this was last year, we looked at yam. And we found, of course, that yam has that antihypertensive activity, but we have been able to break that yam into components, find the particular kind of enzyme they are interacting with. And using this kind of AI molecular docking technique, we have been able to challenge the specific receptors. So we are not just only using an animal model where we have to be in the lab, we're also going now to an AI modeling to see whether the results we have in the animal modelings are actually in agreement with what we may actually do just with looking at the AI modeling using receptors, using drugs, using chemicals, using compounds. And we find that in agreement a lot. That means, of course, that we are having another validation of what we have been doing all this while. So this is how we're able to draw those kind of beautiful graphs. So when I come to class sometimes, I tell students, oh, that's for this muscle to contract. There have to be the release of this chemical. Calcium comes in there, binds to troponin C. Troponin C binds, causes a conformational change on the actin. And of course, we have the cross bridge formation, which brings about the opening of this channel leading to the closure or the shortening of the edge band, and which we call muscle contraction. That's, of course, the big picture. But that big picture is underlined by these different molecular events. And it is when we understand these molecular events that we can then be able to understand how we can modulate, how we can modify those same parameters, especially when things go wrong. That has been our aim. That is, of course, what we are doing currently. That is what we intend to build on. And thank you again for listening. I hope I've not bored you.
You certainly haven't bored us at all. I'm so engaged and intrigued. And I want to open the floor up for questions, but my question that's bubbling in my head is, when will you employ human trials for some of the things that you have investigated?
Well, human trials, we have actually started, we are currently looking at doing a phase 1 clinical trial, but everything comes with money and comes with the necessary ethical approval. It's a challenge that we are having again in this part of our world because, yes, this is, of course, what we have to discuss. Our limitations are great because of the financial aspect. But what we are doing again is also, which I have found that as a means of overcoming these limitations and challenges, to think about collaboration. I will say this, that when I started my understanding of what research should be, I thought I have to do everything. I thought I may have to, keep myself in the lab morning, afternoon, and night. But we know we are in an environment where we are kind of resource challenged, and it's about reaching out across the aisle. You have an idea, you look for those who have similar ideas or similar competencies. You sometimes just, sending an email. I will tell you, currently today, I have collaborated in some of my work with over 200 people. Some of these people, I've never met them. Some of these people, I have never even spoken with them, one-on-one. But I found that that's actually a way to go. You don't have all the resources, you can reach across the aisle. It's possible that some other person may have a machine or an equipment. He can do A, B, C, and you can do F, Y, Z. Another person can do X, Y, C. And that's one of the things I've been leveraging on currently to see how I can work with that. So some of the work I'm doing, if you go to the full paper, you will see that some of them, the affiliations of people who are in that paper can run up to 10 different schools. So one is in Africa, one is in Europe, one is in India, one is in China, one is in America, one, people are everywhere. I can develop a sample and say, okay, you have this equipment, help me run this, help me run that, help me run that. And once you have the same mindset for progression and you're able to have a team that you can understand each other, it's possible. So yes, on the issues of clinical trials, we are working towards that. We are looking for the necessary funding, and the necessary funding, when we get that, I think that is a possibility. One of the things, again, I will say we have found that is in this part of our world, there are challenges to even recruiting people. You'll be surprised. I will tell you that I go to the communities and I'm doing a health campaign, and I tell people, come, let me measure your blood pressure. And they're asking me, how much am I going to pay them? You know? So if somebody is asking you for money just for you to measure his blood pressure, which is going to be for his own good, you can imagine what it's going to cost you to recruit him for a week study. So these are challenges that we have to be aware of. But like I said, we're looking for those collaborations, current collaborations that are looking towards raising those kinds of funding that will help us take it to the next level.
Thank you so much. I open the floor to any questions. Anyone else has any questions? We know that hypertension is certainly something that all of us are challenged with, within, if not personally, within your families. And as I indicated to you, my personal interest is the link between hypertension and Alzheimer's disease. But I don't see any hands going up or questions in the chat. Can you tell us what you intend to do in Belize in May?
Okay, in Belize, we have actually started the process. We want to still do some bit of this kind of work. We are hoping that we can be able to, through this same similar type of work we've done in Jamaica, replicate some of those here in Belize, where we can cover the whole island, create a campaign for knowing your blood pressure, collect the necessary data so that we can also analyze and have like a kind of beliefs kind of documentation, and so that we can have a true proper representation of what our health status is. We can have a true proper representation of what the hypertension and the correlation with the other NCDs are. And yes, possibly publish that so that other people too can interact and understand what our issues are. There's a possibility that when you have all that information, you may get the funding to also challenge these issues, these limitations. And so we are looking forward to that. Sorry, I keep mentioning Ireland. I am just used to mention Ireland. Belize as a country, I just, when I mentioned Jamaica, I mentioned Ireland. I'm sorry about that.
Thanks for that clarification. It's very much needed research, all, as you said, all through the Caribbean, and we look forward to being involved in the study in May. It's in May, right? I see.
Yes, it's in May. We have started compiling the necessary documentation to get approval from the Ministry of Health and the necessary IRBs, and then we are getting ready to mobilize as many persons as possible. And if you are willing to join us in our studies, we have an open door, and we'll be willing to work with you. It's an opportunity for us to go out there, carry the students along. Thankfully, that's one of the things that we hope to do with our medical students: expose them to the community, expose them to knowing how to interact with people, how to also collect data, because those are part of the objectives of the medical school. Those are part of the objectives that are actually enshrined in the curriculum, which is one of the reasons why I'm here, to help to develop some of the curriculum for some of the programs that are already present and that will be coming on board here at UB.
Good. I see a question in the chat box. If you can address it. Have you
Okay, have you taken any preliminary look into the availability of medical information for the population of Belize? Yes, I have seen that, and I would say that Belize actually has. I have gone to the website. I see that there are many documentations of some of these diseases, which is quite good. But I have not seen that for hypertension. I've not seen that for myocardial infarction and even diabetes. So I think that whatever data we generate will be a plus, will be a big plus to the country. Um, and yes, difficulties that I have actually observed, just talking with people, are not different from the difficulties I've actually observed in Jamaica. Like I said, people are the same everywhere. Some people are a bit skeptical when you come to them and talk about health issues. And these are cultural issues, I would say. We know that cultural issues, we saw that play out during COVID. Many people still did not want to take the vaccine because of their cultural skepticisms. Many people did not want to get involved because of what they feel and, what I call it, yeah, those differences, who you believe or who you should believe and who you should have faith in. And I think it's had to be like, what I think about it is this. If there's a natural saying that people will always trust somebody that looks better, that look like them. So if we're able to get our own students, our own members of staff, and of course, the community of researchers here at Belize to get into the community, I think we may be able to do a lot more better than asking people coming from outside. Well, people coming from outside will also have their expertise, but imagine you going into your community, people will have a lot more trust that you are not coming to rip them off, that you have their best interest at heart. And when we have this information, we intend to use them for the growth and the betterment of the nation.
Thank you very much, Professor Chucks, for representing the recently established School of Medicine in this academic series. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us. We hope that before you leave that you will do something else. We have a bigger event in May, as we did a culminating academic series, and probably you can present something to a wider community in a face-to-face setting. I wish you all the best in the time that you are here, and certainly the two of us at the research office would be more than willing to be involved in this study to help spread the word, and certainly to put you in contact with some of the other agencies around who, this could be something that people do in their offices or workplaces on a particular day, measure your blood pressure. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and let's give him a round of applause, hearts, whatever, in terms of the presentation.
Thank you so much for listening.
Sure. And I again want to take the opportunity to apologize to I think I just saw her disappear, but I want to publicly apologize to marketing and communication for sharing the wrong link with them. We've been getting calls, we've been responding to the Facebook posts, but I can see that over 30 people were in this audience, so at least you got through, and we will make some sort of accommodation to share this on the UB Facebook page, some parts of it, so people would know that it happened. Now we turn to our second presenter, Dr. Leolin Swift Castillo, and she's a full-time member of the University of Belize. She is a registered nurse for 35 years, a psychiatric practitioner for 30 years, and a nurse educator for 25 years. When I first saw her, my first interaction with her was when she was the dean of the then Faculty of Nursing, Allied Health and Social Work. And boy, was she fiery in that graduation ceremony. And so, having been the UB chair of nursing, an active nurse, she has a lot of experience behind her. But she recently completed her doctoral degree, and it is that study that she's going to present to us on the role of siblings in intimate partner violence. So, Dr. Castillo, I hope you're there. Dr. Castillo, if you could probably put on your camera. I don't see you. We don't hear you yet. You're still muted, but we can see
I know.
your slides.
My apologies.
And if
You
you could,
hear me now?
we can hear you now. And if you can probably take us the slide view, that would be beautiful. And you can go ahead.
Okay, sure. Alrighty, let me first thank the research department or office for facilitating the academic research series where we can make contribution as to what we have done as it relates to research. No, I think I made a mistake when I submitted the title for my research, and so I make the modification. It is the role of sibling relationships in children's experience of intimate partner violence, and it is a grounded theory study. I just provided an outline as to how I will progress in this presentation. So I'll give you just a background of the study, the purpose of the study, my research question, the significance of this study. What are some philosophical underpinnings of this research study? The methodology that I employed, the methods used, the data analysis that occurred, the scientific rigor that occurred in my data analysis, the results, the discussion, the implications of this study, and future research that can be generated from the study. And last is the limitations of the study. Now, when you're looking at intimate partner violence, we say it is something that is synonymous to that of domestic violence. It is a very pervasive, and it is a phenomenon, is complex public health phenomenon that is affecting each and every country. The World Health Organization in 2022 defined IPV as an intimate relationship. There's behaviors within an intimate relationship that can cause physical, psychological, as well as sexual harm. And these include acts of physical aggression, psychological abuse, sexual coercion, and most importantly, the impacts that it has done, both from that of the former spouse as well as current spouse. Now, what this definition does is that it delineates to us that IPV can be done either by women or men, whether it's in heterosexual or that of homosexual relationship. Now, there has been great variation in the term of the involvement of children in IPV. Early researchers looked at the term witness, and so it saw the children as not being actively involved in the process. Other researchers utilized the term exposure. It was much more broader than that of witness. However, it still saw the children as being passive observers in the intimate partner violence. So the terminologies that have been utilized by current researchers is experience. Hence, my research focuses on the experience of children in IPV relationship. Now, Kesselbach in 2022 says that approximately 117 million children are exposed annually to intimate partner violence. Where et al. Said that at least, and this is in the United States, 79% of individuals under the age of 18 is growing up with a sibling. Now, it is estimated that approximately $55 billion is attributed to look at the effects of IPV on their family. The lifetime cost attributed to IPV is estimated at $3.6 trillion. And these include things like loss of productivity, criminal justice costs, court, and as well other costs related to IPV. Now, IPV has variations of outcomes. It looks at that of functional impairment, psychopathology. We have internalizing and externalizing behaviors of children and adjustment problems. But there are other research that have identified that children have adjusted, having been exposed to IPV. So there is great variability that have been identified in the literature regarding children's adjustment to IPV. So I thought that when you're looking at the different research that have been done, there have been over-reliance. And when I say over-reliance, majority of the research that were conducted focused on quantitative methodologies and parental reports rather than getting the reports from that of the children. And so we see, when I thought about this research, I said, rather than looking at it from a quantitative methodology, I opted for the qualitative methodology. Previous research have also focused on the negative effects rather than resilience. Now, within any phenomenon, there's always going to be the positive and the negative aspect. But majority of the research that has been put forward has focused primarily on the negative effects of IPV, but there are children who have become resilient after being exposed to IPV. Additionally, there is what I refer to as the lack of developmental sensitivity, because you have individuals, the children, we are saying is of how they develop. Hence the reason, looking at all of those research that has been put forward, there was clearly a lack of developmental sensitivity, getting the represented children, not the that pediatric population, well, in pediatric population. There is also limited research that has focused on sibling relationship. The sibling relationship is now one that is of burgeoning interest to researchers. They have identified that the sibling relationship has not been explored. Hence the reason that was a gap in the literature that I had identified for my research study. So the purpose of my study was to explore the role of sibling relationship in children's experience of IPV. My research question then was, what is the role of sibling relationships in children who experience IPV between their parents? Now, as I said, the sibling relationship has been one in which there's a burgeoning interest. They have identified that if you have a close sibling relationship, children are better. Instances, if you have a sibling relationship that is fraught with conflict, then the child does not adjust to that experience of IPV. Hence the reason why I needed to know what was causing, what were some of the things, what were some of those unobserved they have added to the body of knowledge. But what they have focused on was primarily observable data that they could have seen. My research then was looking at those unobservable structures that could not be seen between siblings. So the significance of this study was to enhance my understanding of sibling relationships. It also was important or significant to contribute to intervention strategies. My focus then was not that of pathology or adverse effects, but rather on resilience. How do children bounce back from that of being experiencing IPV? I also said that it was significant because it addressed the methodological limitations, meaning that it focused on a qualitative study rather than that of quantitative methodology. It also identified areas for policy and practice modifications. And so I'm speaking primarily to our country. What are some of the things that need to change? What are some practice modifications that need to be done? And so for this study, as I said, this is a grounded theory study. And so what were the philosophical tenets that drove this study was that of constructivism. Now, as the word suggests, constructivism says that positive area. Constructivism says there is multiple subjective and constructive reality, meaning that as individuals, we construct what we see based on our interaction with the environment. So it is saying to us that the data do not provide a window of reality. Rather, the discovered reality arises from the interaction process and is temporal. Now, the person that developed this particular methodology that I employed was Kati Sharmas. And you're going to see that there are different versions of the theory because this is of participants, their experience, how did they see their world, how did they construct their world. And so I thought that this particular theory was of importance to me. Now, 1 minute. On the guiding paradigm was that of constructivism, philosophical underpinnings for constructivism, and that is that of pragmatism and symbolic interactionism. Let me just get a little sip of water. Now, as the word pragma suggests, pragma is saying it is action. And it is also saying that truth is not seen as an absolute or something that is static, but it is better understood in terms of its practical utility. It is saying to us that as human beings, our action has certain consequences. And so we then know whatever we think is manifested in our behaviors. And so whatever behavior we do has consequences. And so pragmatism is that we cannot separate it from the context in which it occurred. So this is why I chose, again, my methodology. Now, symbolic interactionism was developed by that of Bloomer, who says that as individuals, we create our own meanings, and we create our own meanings through our interactions with the social environment. What meaning do we give to our interaction? How do we interpret our interactions? This is the interpretive aspect that makes the grounded theory that I've selected the most beneficial to have guided this study. Now, your constructive grounded theory, and as I said, there was different version. The first version was developed in 1967, and this was by Glaser and Strauss. But one of the things that I saw in that particular methodology is that they said that we are not supposed to be reviewing the literature in order for us to do our studies. And from there was a diversion between Glaser and Strauss. And what Strauss did was to, apart from, because this is inductive, Strauss decided that I'm going to add another that as human beings, we construct, we give meaning to our interactions with individuals. And particularly, if there is little known about a particular phenomenon, it is best that we utilize your constructive grounded theory. This particular theory is very flexible. It tends to be iterative. There's an iterative process. And all it is saying is that it is something that is going to continue going on and on. It is the researcher and the participant constructing their meanings. And so that is what I like. Now, one of the key things in this particular theory is that there was the need for me to do some type of self-evaluation so that I do not bring in, did not brought in any type of biases into the research study. So this is one of the things I had to be reflexive as to what are some of my prejudices? What are some of my biases? And so that was what I needed to do before the start of my study. It is also contextual sensitive. And so it is focused particularly on the individual during that interaction. And so it focused primarily on the processes, not the outcomes, because remember, with this, the constructive grounded theory is saying, I am going to emerge with a theory. And so I did not go in there with any preconceived notion as to what my theory is going to be. My theory was grounded in the data that was provided by the participants. So it is from the participants. All the results that were obtained were from them. So for the methods now, if you're looking at the setting was based either online because some individuals work and so they found it very convenient for them to do it online. And the other was done face-to-face at a place that was convenient, one that promoted confidentiality so that nobody will know who my participants were in the study. Prior to being selected though, I think I posted my research on Facebook. And so based on that, I got calls and they asked whether or not they can join. But in order for them to join, they must have met certain criteria for the study. They must have been 18 years or older. They must have lived with 2 or more siblings, and they must have been able to speak and write English. So a demographic questionnaire was provided to them to see if they met the inclusion criteria. Once they met that inclusion criteria, then we started the process. So thereafter, they were asked to sign the consent form, ensuring that whatever was said was going to remain confidential and anonymity, meaning that we de-identified the names of the participants of the study. Now, there were several different sampling techniques that I utilized. At the start of the study, I did quite well. And so I obtained my first, that it seems to be tall because the ones that thought that they had the criteria for the study. What I then did was to utilize snowball sampling. And so I asked the participants that I had already interviewed if they knew someone who would be interested. It was through that I was able to get other participants. The last type of sampling was that of theoretical sampling. In order to get another patient, another person. So I use sampling where I would need to get my participants. I obtained participants, I believe, from the south and from the west and from Belize City. So those were my districts in which I got majority of my sample. The sample size that I obtained was, I believe it was 11 participants for the study. As I said, I had already gotten IRB approval from my university. I got agency approval from Belize, from the Life Association to place flyers on their bulletin board. Now, one of the things I must say that went through the recruitment process, provide any type of information, particularly when it came to face online, because there is a possibility that some of the information through downloading may have been leaked. And so they were kind of skeptical, even though they were referred by different agencies. And so those participants never did take place. Did not participate in the process. No inclusion, then we were pretty much ready to go. I utilized two recording devices, and these recording devices were my personal devices that were purchased. Once the information shared was transcribed, those information were deleted. So I had two devices just to ensure that if one did not work well, I had what I would refer to as a backup. So we had a total of 11 participants in this study. I think I went through the screening, the demographic questionnaire, and the demographic questionnaire was one in which we looked primarily at the age, the educational, the number of siblings that they had, the marital status, and you're going to see when I present that section. Now, the data management analysis software that I used was NVivo. And I say this is one of the software I believe that if the University of Belize is saying to us and services. And so I utilize the NVivo transcription services to transcribe. Even though they transcribed those interviews, I still had to double check because of the language barrier and the terms that some of the participants used. I had to make sure that it captured the meaning of the patient. So then, let me go into the data analysis, right? And so, are you all still hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Yes? Hello?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, okay, you're hearing me. Okay. So what happened with my data analysis? In data party construct this wrong. We are saying that data collection and analysis occurred simultaneously, meaning that as I collected my first interview, the data for my first interview, it went through a process of coding. And so as I collect the data, it was analyzed. So what I utilized was 3 types of coding according to Sharma's: open coding, focus coding, and theoretical coding. The data, if you're looking at open coding, we're saying data was broken down into small parts. And I examined that. I wanted to find out what exactly was my participants saying. So I developed initial codes. And it is with the initial codes that I developed was based on that particular participant language, utilizing what they said. And so interview line by line, word for word, to identify codes that resonated with what the participants were saying. So what I did was, between my interviews, was to do constant comparisons of data. Why? I want to see what were the similarities, what were the differences in the data that I have collected from my patients, from my participants. Now, the second one is that of what I did in this section was to identify which one of the codes were flawed. Well, I wanted to see which one of the codes was of most significant. I started to sort and compare those data. It is at this point where doc somewhere else for data collection. And so my last one was that of theoretical coding. And this is where the data that were, the codes that were originally developed, I start to place them in categories and look at the relationship between the categories. This is where I develop my theoretical code. And I'm going to show you exactly an example as to how I went through the process of coding my data. So this is an example. So the open coding, this is participant 1. This participant said, if I were to go back to the early years of childhood, a typical day would involve some sport activity. This is what the participant said, line for line, word for word. So I wrote this. I said the participants seemed elated, reflecting on what life was like growing up with his siblings and activities he enjoyed. Now, one of the keys, you're talking with you, but we're looking particularly at the nonverbal as well as the verbal communication. I was looking to see if there was any type of congruence and incongruence in what the participant was saying and what their nonverbal was saying. So in reflecting, this is what I gathered from this participant. The sporting activities with siblings. Now, if you look at participant 2 said everybody is being assigned to chores. And so for that, a typical day for them was that they were assigned chores. Now, participant 3 said a typical day with my siblings would involve getting up in the morning and getting ready for school. So you can see that each participant here. Now, if you look at participant 2, it seems based on that participant verbal communication and the body language that are authoritarian. The parents tell you what to do, and that is it. You have absolutely no contribution to make. All is it is that you do as you're told. And so I said, is this a cultural dogma in our country? That I guess it was from the yesteryears that as parents, you do as you're told with no question asked. And so that was what I wrote in my memo. And so the focus coding was performing chores given by parents with siblings. The third one is look at getting up and getting ready for school. However, the tone of voice of this participant resonates with that of being a parent rather than a sibling. And so I asked my question, is this parentification? Is this parentification? Because this participant was the eldest in her family. And so based on how she communicated and the tone of voice that she used, I put that down based on my reflection. And so the focus coding was getting ready for school. Now, all of these had different areas that they address. What my theoretical code that I developed was engaging in daily activities with siblings. So that was my theoretical code that I developed. And I did this for each interview so that at the end, my theoretical framework was grounded in data. So when you're looking at the scientific rigor that was applied, Sharma's identified 4 fundamental criteria: credibility, and it looks at your method of data collection. One of the things that I said was theoretical sampling, ensuring that I go to different areas in order for my data, because once you see that you're getting the same thing over and over, and you only collected a few participants, it is saying to you, there is the need for prolonged data collection. I need to find some other areas in order to find participants for my study. So with the constant comparison between my participants and the information shared, it provided that level of credibility. In addition, at the end of each one of the interview, what I did was that of member checking. I ensured that whatever information that was shared through feedback, if it was accurate. And so one of the things I did was to provide that feedback to ensure that the information shared was indeed what the participant said. Originality. The insights that was gained from the study was original, because you're going to see that they provided new insights on the role of sibling relationships in children's experience of IPD. And so it added to the existing body of knowledge regarding intimate partner violence. Now, with this, one of the things with scientific rigor was that of resonance. And so with resonance, we're saying that the participants of this study was able to relate their experience of intimate partner violence. And you're going to see that it's a phenomenon that continues to plague communities in our country without us understanding the scope of it. This particular research is very useful, and it's useful not only in nursing, but it's in social work, in pharmacy, in any sector of this country. Because I always say that a healthy population is a wealthy population. And so if you're within that IPV environment, it affects an individual, primarily that of children. I say that, and you might be wondering why I chose this topic. This particular topic is there to me because as a child, I experienced IPV between my mom and dad. And I always wanted to know, why is it that my brothers, my sisters, and I'm talking about the older ones, behave different than the younger ones? Hence the reason for my study. So I just wanted to provide you with that backdrop. But with the usefulness, we're saying that these findings can be applied to practice. They can inform policy development, and they can let us look at another window through which we can address this global public health phenomenon. So these are my sample characteristics. And if you can see, only one male was in my study. And I'm going to tell you about the limitations therefore. So I had one male in this entire study. The marital status, you can see I had 3 common law. We had 3 that were married and 4 that were single. The ethnicity was that of Creole, Garifuna, Mestizos. Those were the 3 ethnic groups that were identified. But if you look here, you can see for some of the participants. And the educational level range from that of high school to that of having a doctoral degree. So there was a wide array as we're looking at age, because the youngest was 20 and the oldest was 66 years. So we can see that there was a great variation in age in the participants of the study. The types of abuse that was witnessed, the family dynamics, the sibling dynamics, the types of roles assumed, the